It's Create Day, my friends, and with spooky season just around the corner, I felt inspired to transform some thrifted items into dark academia home decor. Welcome to my channel. Let's get started. I'm starting off with this candlestick from the thrift store that I got for $3. It's originally from Pier 1, so it was quite the bargain. I like the idea of being able to wet distress back down to that red, but it was just a little too bright for me. So I am mixing cardinal red and burgundy to make a slightly softer, I guess you could say, shade of red. However, I should have primed this candlestick first because I did have some issues when I wet distressed. Some of that acrylic paint did come off in spots and expose the brighter red. Before I paint this the main color that I want, I'm going to add some embroidery floss. It's just going to be for texture and to just kind of create a little scene of not a spider web, but like fibers that have just gathered. It'll make more sense later. So I am using Mod Podge, and I decided I would brush that onto the candlestick and then attach my embroidery floss. However, it was proving to be quite difficult. It kept sticking to my fingers and pulling back up. So I ended up seeing if it would work better if I laid that thread down into the Mod Podge, covering the whole thing and then laying it on that way, but that didn't work well either. So I ended up just doing it this way for the rest of it. And I'm just doing a random pattern. Now here's where I go to put that thread through the Mod Podge. And that was even worse because now it's really sticky, and I tried using a little silicone spatula to press it down in there, and that did help, but this ended up being a lot more difficult than I expected it to be. So now here's where I just go back and do it the way I was doing it the first time. That ended up just being easier. And there you can see I'm using my little silicone. It's a makeup tool that I got from the Dollar Tree, and that seemed to help because once it started sticking to that, I knew it was time to clean that little spatula off, and then it would work well again. So here I'm just filling in the extra little openings with extra pieces of thread. And now I'm going to use the Cameo mold from IOD, and I'm using the IOD air dry clay. I always put the cornstarch in the mold first, and then I'm just going to press this all out and have a nice little cameo to put on the front. I'm using Gorilla Wood glue to apply to the back of the cameo, and then I will press it into place. And I will just gently press down around all those edges to make sure that it is on there and will adhere well. I need a couple of moths for this project, so I'm using IOD's Monarch mold. I will make 2 of these and then glue them on the base of the candlestick with the Gorilla Wood glue. It's time for paint, so I'm using my black chalk paint. I didn't wait for the molds to completely dry. I like to paint them while they're still somewhat wet. You get less cracking and warping that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and give this a nice solid coat of the black chalk paint. Once that was dry, I just took a damp rag and started to wet distress to bring back just a little bit of that red in certain areas. I'll be sure to leave links for everything that I used on these projects today in the description box. I'm using metallic gold acrylic paint for the Cameo and the two moths. Now for the embroidery floss, I am going to be dry brushing several colors on here. I'm starting with Espresso Bean, and I'm just going to get a little paint on my brush, dab off the excess, and just lightly brush over all those threads, trying to make sure I don't get the paint down onto the candlestick itself, just brushing this across those threads. I do the same thing with the next color called Deep Gray. The next color is called Sandstone. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm just gradually adding these different shades, kind of lightening it back up, and then I will go in for the final coat will be with the metallic gold. And I'm going to use this sparingly. I just want to just very gently highlight that gold onto those threads. The final step is my black finishing wax. And I'm going to brush this over the entire candlestick, including those castings. Everything is going to get a good coat of this, and then I will wipe it back with a cloth. This step seals the chalk paint, but it also just kind of brings all the elements of this piece together and more uniform. Gives it a nice, richer look to it. And here's how this one turned out. My next project is this mirrored tray I've had in my stash for quite a while, and I thought it would be absolutely perfect for this theme. I'm removing all the little felt pads on the bottom, and then I am going to take the screws out because I thought I could remove that mirror and replace it with something else, either, cut a piece of plywood or maybe some really good cardboard, but it was not budging and I didn't want to take the chance of ruining it by trying to pry it off of there. So I'm cleaning off the glass with some rubbing alcohol, and then I'm going to apply 2 coats of Dixie Belle Slick Stick so that I can just go ahead and paint over the mirror. With the Slick Stick, you need to apply the first coat and let it dry a couple of hours. Then you can apply the second coat and let it dry overnight. So with this one, I had the same idea as with the candlestick. I was going to go ahead and paint this whole thing with the red color that I had mixed up using the burgundy and the cardinal red. And I ran into the same problem when I went to wet distress. So I ended up doing something different. and you'll see what that is. Now with that acrylic paint dry, I'm going to go in with my black chalk paint again and paint the entire thing with that black chalk paint. So now I'm wet distressing with my damp rag, and I am getting a little bit of that red to peek through on some of those ornate little pieces around the edge of the tray. But it's also coming through and pulling off the acrylic paint and showing that gold underneath. So I ended up painting another coat of the black chalk paint on here, and once that was dry, I'm going in with that mixture of red and I'm painting it over all those details, dabbing off with a baby wipe so that I'm not getting like just a solid paint color all over these areas. I want to mute it down a little bit and just kind of do it mostly over the high points and leave the more recessed areas the darker color. I wanted to add some transfers to this, so I'm using Iron Orchid Designs Brocante Transfers. I've picked out a couple of my, I'm calling them moths, even though they could be butterflies, and then a floral design, and I'm going to apply those into the center of that tray. I'm starting with the floral, and I'm going to remove that from the backing and place it in where I want it, and then grab my little transfer stick and rub this down onto that tray. Once I had this transferred on there, it was just way too white, but I do fix that. And so once you get this all burnished on there and you can pull off that transfer sheet, just rub over the design with that transfer sheet to make sure that everything is really well adhered. And so now I'm just going to go ahead and add my two little moths. I'm using that same metallic gold paint that I used on the candlestick to do some highlighting on all these little leaf and floral embellishments around this tray. I'm not covering the entire leaf or flower. I am just going kind of around the edges, just highlighting. And I'll do a little bit like on the raised areas, like on the leaves where the vein of the leaf is, and in the centers of those flowers. I'm also applying this very lightly around that little raised edge and the center of the tray. With some fine grit sandpaper, I'm going to rough up that center transfer that's too white. I think it will help with what I want to do next as far as applying some paint to it to kind of bring it more in tone with the colors of the moths. To achieve this look, I'm using a color called Mudstone. I've watered it down slightly and I am brushing it over the transfer, and then I will dab off the excess with a baby wipe. So I'm not like going to completely cover this and let it dry. I just want to get like a little bit of a haze on here to have it, more cohesive with the other transfers. Next, I'm using my metallic gold paint just to add a little bit of shimmer to these moths and the florals in the center. I'm just taking a very small amount and dabbing it onto those little spots on the wings and the center of the flower. I also highlight around the edges of the flowers and the leaves. It's very subtle, but it does add a nice touch. I'm applying a coat of polycrylic on the bottom of the tray. I'm going to be waxing the rest of the tray, but I need to glue on some feet onto the bottom, so I did not want to have a wax finish on it. So now I'm using my black wax to go in and wax over the entire tray, with the exception of the embellished areas. I did not want to get wax gooped up down into all those recessed areas. So I'm just doing the rest of the tray, the center and the sides. And same procedure, brush it on, wipe it back. These are the feet I'm going to use. They will go perfectly with this project. I got them off of Amazon, and I will leave the link in the description box. I can't use the screws that come with them. They would bust down in through that glass because they're just longer than, it's a pretty thin backing that's on this. So I'm using E6000 to glue them in place. I hold them down for a minute or so until they will stay in place, and then pick it up and eyeball it to make sure they look the way I want them to. Now I want to cover up these little holes for the screws. So I am going to use some brads that I got from Hobby Lobby. There's some in here that are like almost the perfect color for this. So I'm just going to snip off most of those little legs, and then what's left I will bend down into the center of the brad. And I do recommend cutting it a little bit longer than I did. It's easier to bend over if you do that. So now using Fabri-Tac glue, going to apply a little bit of glue into the screw hole, and then I'm going to apply some of that into my brad as well, and then just press it on there and it covers up the holes. Gives it a much more finished look. Even though they don't look like screws, I just think it looks a lot better. So this is how those look when they're done. And this is how this little tray turned out. My final project is this Kleenex box cover that I've had in my stash for a while as well. And I thought it too would be perfect for this. So I'm going to get it all cleaned up and then do my 2 coats of Dixie Belle's Slick Stick. I'm going to paint this one with Fusion's cast iron paint. That's my little sample that I have, and I am loving this paint so far. I couldn't wait to see how it worked out on this project. So I'm using a pointy brush to try and get down into all that detail. And you want to have a little bit of patience because it does take time to fill in all those little tiny gaps. But once I got that done, then I went ahead and painted the body of the box with that same color. And it is just gorgeous. So now I'm taking a smaller pointy brush and filling in all those little areas where the paint didn't quite get to. This is time consuming when you got all this detail. It does take several passes. You have to keep looking at it from different angles to catch all the white spots that show through. So now I'm going to take that same gold metallic paint and I'm going to just kind of dry brush over all this detail. And again, it's a little time consuming, but because you want to be careful that you're not glopping the paint on there. I don't want it to go down into any of the recessed areas. I just want it on top of the details. But look at that, it's just gorgeous. I'm going to add 2 transfers to this one, and they are from the same Brocante IOD transfer book. So I've got this big moth and this little moth, and I'm going to put the bigger moth on the side and wrap his wings around to the other side. So I taped him on there to keep him in place while I take off that backer sheet and just press it down. And I do this top side first, and then I have to go in and kind of snip a little closer to the wings to get it to wrap around. It makes it easier to transfer it that way. I add the smaller one on the top of the box in the corner, and once he is on there, the only thing left is to go ahead and do some black wax. Now this fusion paint doesn't need the wax, it's got a sealer on it, but I wanted to kind of just bring this all together with that black wax, just to kind of add some more, and and it goes with the other projects that I did. But it's definitely not necessary. This was just my personal preference. Once I have that wiped on and then buffed off, this project is complete. I hope you have enjoyed today's video, and remember, all these different techniques can be used on any style that you prefer for your own home. I hope you find my content useful and will consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. But most importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.